Welcome to the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joel Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. Today on the show, I chat with Joel Malick, Financial Advisor at Afterwork Wealth Company and author of the book Afterwork. In our interview, Joel breaks down what he calls the retirement lie. From there, he addresses the paradigm shifts and disciplines involved in making retirement the most rewarding stage of a person's life. And now, my interview with Joel. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joe.
I'm recording here in Minneapolis. You're not in Minneapolis. Where are you calling us from?
Beautiful Colorado Springs, the fastest growing city in the country, I think they tell me. So
it's God's country out there.
It's beautiful. Pikes Peak right there, America's mountain.
I have family members that own property on Pikes Peak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It's been a while. I had a family reunion out there and went camping on Pikes Peak probably 20 years ago, something like that.
Did you make it, obviously? Good.
Yeah. So how long have you been in Colorado Springs?
I landed here in 8th grade. It was 1992. So other than a quick 4-year stint for college, I've lived here and raising my family here and love it.
Your winters aren't as bad as Minnesota, I imagine, right?
No, I guess I can't complain about our winters on this show in general, right?
So you are a financial advisor, and where'd you go to college, and is that something that you wanted to do for a long time, or how'd you get into it?
Yeah, I went to school in Seattle Pacific University, and I chose that school because I was a soccer player, and they had a good program, and that's kind of how I landed up there and played throughout my college career and enjoyed that. You know, I got into finance just because I was there in the late 90s. And as you remember, Joe, the late 90s was, well, all of the 90s was a time of boom.
Yeah.
And then the dot-com era was kind of when I was there. We call it the dot-bomb now, right? And it was kind of the hot thing. And I just, I interned at Payne Weber. And I don't remember thinking this is what I want to do. I just found myself in it, and I'm enjoying it.
That's cool. And so are most of your clients retirees?
We kind of cover the gamut. We have kind of a different approach to financial services, so we tend to not have a core target client based on the way we serve our clientele. So we get them all across the board, and I think we enjoy the different approaches that requires of us. It keeps us on our toes.
We want to talk a little bit, or quite a bit today, about your book, Afterwork. How did that come about? Yeah,
so I never really had any grand plans to be an author. I wasn't looking for a topic to write on because I knew I wanted to write one. It really came out of these conversations I would have with clients once we figure out all the financial pieces of retirement and the date was on the calendar and they knew, okay, retirement's coming up, whether it's 4 or 6 months away, they would inevitably ask, do you have a good book you can recommend? And I always sort of thought, not really, because they all kind of have their own financial angle, right? Whether they're selling some kind of strategy or what have you. And that wasn't what we were going for. And that wasn't even what the client was asking because we had already had the financial piece figured out. We knew they could afford to retire, but what we didn't know is could they actually handle retirement? And when I wrote the first version of the book, which we self-published on Amazon, we were just doing it, Joe, for our clients. Mm-hmm. It was going to be kind of a resource, something for them to be able to read and begin to dream about what retirement could look like. And I'll be honest with you, when we first wrote it, we had no idea that 4 years later, the need would be as strong as it is today. We've really stepped into, I think, a climate where people are asking themselves, what is this retirement thing? Do I even want this?
Right.
I've kind of been told I'm supposed to want this, but in my inner being, I don't feel like I'm done. So how do I balance this idea that society's kind of telling me it's time to go away, but I'm not ready to?
Yeah, I run across clients all the time who, even if they have the financial capability, again, if we're giving a stated age, 65, 67, whatever, to retire, they could retire at 55, and they're like, I don't want to. But I think part of why they don't want to is they don't have any idea what they do after the fact.
First of all, trying to completely rethink this idea of retirement. I think we use the word retirement because everyone knows what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the word that we still use, but we're trying to change the way we dream about it. We call it the retirement lie as part of our tagline in the book. So the book's called Afterwork, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams. And the premise is you can't do this overnight, right? So sort of like accumulating assets, you start early on and you save and you build your way. Well, a lot of the mindsets that we need to adopt in order to really enjoy that kind of third season or that encore, right, or whatever you want to call it, you can't just show up and say, who do I want to be now? These are things that take a lot of time to develop. And so we want to encourage people to start thinking about it differently as soon as possible. And the book is really designed not just for the retiree, it's really for anyone. I mean, if you could adopt these mindsets earlier in life, you'd be better off. I'll give you like one example.
Sure.
We believe that in general, you should look at your purpose as larger than your work. And so for men in particular, this is a challenge because they really adopt their work as their main purpose. Mm-hmm. And so when they leave that one day, they don't really have a sense of like, who am I and what am I supposed to be doing? Because a permanent vacation doesn't seem to be filling the bucket.
Right. And it is the first question when you're talking to somebody. It's, hi, what's your name and what do you do? I mean, at least in our society in the United States, right?
Yeah, just wait till you get into retirement and you go to the parties and they say, what did you used to do? I always tell people, do you want to be a what did you used to do? And everyone's like, that sounds terrible. I'm like, well, that's retirement.
Right.
And when they pivot to what are you doing now, they really mean, do you like pickleball or golf?
Right.
So
right. And can you do it 5 times a week, right?
Yeah. And I tell people all the time, I say, look, this is not a book about how to not have any fun. We want you to enjoy some of the things that you've absolutely earned. You've got some more free time. I'm sure you've got a bigger family. Maybe you got a 50th anniversary coming up, some places you want to go see. Fantastic. But the retirement lie is that those things are the entree. Well, we're saying that those things need to be the garnish on the dish. They need to be the extra things, the texture that you add to your life. But when your whole life becomes a vacation, your vacations don't work anymore. The only reason they work now is because you work hard, get a chance to break away, be with the family, have dinner with the whole family. It's unique. But when that is your whole life, all of those things lose that luster, and we're not prepared for that because we believe that it's going to be great. And then we find out it's not.
And there's a lot of deterioration mentally and physically right after retirement if you don't have anything going on.
Oh, yeah. Spot on there. I try to help people understand that the posture in which you approach retirement is going to make a very big difference. And so we try to help people understand that we need to adjust our expectations a little bit, or a lot of bit in some cases, because we expect it to be generally easy, because what could possibly go wrong with double the free time and no real structure?
Right.
We expect it to be enjoyable. And then we eventually find that it's actually hard, not always enjoyable, and has plenty of loss that comes along with it. Loss of your own health, loss of loved ones. You're kind of at that tail end of your life expectancy, so some things are happening that you're not enjoying. Well, what I try to tell people is I say, look, let's approach it a little differently. Let's think about it this way. Instead of, congratulations, Joe, you earned it, go enjoy this amazing season, I'm probably going to approach it more like, hey, Joe, you and your wife have raised the kids, you've done an amazing job, you've had a successful career, you've overcome a ton of things, and you are now ready to face what is probably going to be the most challenging season of your life, but it could also be the best. If you're willing to embrace all of the storms as an opportunity to get better, instead of being surprised by them, you're going to find that there's lots of treasure at the bottom on this journey.
So you talk a lot in your book about the difference between happiness and meaningfulness. Maybe you can break that down for us a little bit and then maybe provide some ideas on shifting your focus towards meaningfulness.
The main idea that we begin to unpack and try to get the reader in the right retirement posture is this. The more you make it about you, the less fulfilled you're going to be. And the more you make it about others, the more fulfillment you're going to find. The problem with that idea is that the entire retirement dream is built around you. It's all about like, hey, I put my time in. I've built the company. I've sold the company. I gave all of my time. I even took time away from my family to build this thing. I've put it in. It's sort of behind me now. Now it's time to make it about me. That mindset is going to lead to a fair amount of misery, in my opinion, because I do believe we are wired naturally to find the greatest fulfillment from meeting other people's needs. The paradox on this is I don't necessarily want to get into like how you're going to meet everyone's need, because everybody's got kind of a different story, but I can tell you that mindset shift is super important, because the funny thing is that if you go around meeting a bunch of other people's needs, your needs actually get met.
Sure.
You actually get the bucket filled. You feel like I am useful. I'm making a difference. But you start to make it all about you, and you begin to talk more like, I'm not as useful as I once was. Is this really all there is? And that's the kind of mindset that we're trying to avoid. So happiness, in my opinion, and how we define it in the book, is happiness is looking to gain something, and meaningfulness is looking to change something. And so if you go around rejecting this idea of making myself happy, which I believe ultimately leads to unhappiness, and you pursue this thing called meaningfulness, which is looking to change something, what to change? I don't know. I think you'll have a good idea if you start seeking it. But when you live out of that calling, there are some amazing things that will happen in your life, and your mind will be blown at how fulfilling it can actually be.
Do you have some interesting stories from clients that you've urged towards this helping others or having a better sense of purpose on things they've done?
Yeah, I think one story comes to mind. And, Joe, we talked earlier about planning ahead some. One tenet that we have in our book is this idea of kicking the tires. And what I encourage people to do is, well before you retire, start to carve out a little bit of time in your schedule. And thankfully, with our flexible schedules today that most of us have, a mix of remote and in office, we kind of have a little more time to do some things that we might not otherwise have had a chance to do. I like to encourage people to take a couple hours a week, start doing what you think you might do in retirement, because people will tell me, I'm going to serve on X board, I'm going to volunteer at Y nonprofit. And I go, okay, that's great, but they've not tried it yet. Mm-hmm. Okay, they just assume it's going to be a fit. And it oftentimes is not. Meaning they try the first one, they're like, wow, that was weird. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
Or I didn't get along with any of those people, or I didn't like the executive director, or whatever.
Yeah.
So this person that I'll tell you a quick story about, he had a life event occur that kind of, shook the foundations. We've all been through seasons like that. And he said, you know what, I've got to find something outside of my work that I can pour myself into. It's not that I don't like my work, but I can't just be my work anymore. Mm-hmm. And he tried those first few things and didn't enjoy them, and he thought he would. And then this other thing that he tried that was never really on his radar, it came up through a friend. And, there's always these kind of coincidental connections that pop up. And he tried it, and he loves it. And he's about 2 years from retirement now, just to give you an idea of timeline. He's been doing this for about 5 years, every week. So he goes down to a local prison, and he teaches the 7 habits of highly successful people to a number of the inmates there.
Stephen Covey, right?
Yep, yeah. Stephen Covey's book.
Yeah.
He just loves this because he's had guys get out on the other side who are doing well. They'll come in here and visit with him, and he's watching them change their lives. The reason this is important is this gentleman is now very well versed in the process. He knows he likes it. He's got some influence in the organization, so he can make a more meaningful impact. He's not the newbie. Mm-hmm. And so when his retirement sugar rush is over, and we can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Whenever his sugar rush ends, he knows exactly what he's stepping into.
And feels good about it. You mentioned the sugar rush, and I've heard you talk about it a little before, but let's explain for the audience here what you define as the sugar rush.
I liken it to a marriage. So anyone listening, if you've been married and you've had that honeymoon season, not just the honeymoon, but the season, the first year or whatever, where it's new and it's fun and it's different and it's great. I think if you were to put a number of people on this podcast who have been married 30, 40, 50 years, they would probably very wisely tell you, you don't live in the honeymoon season.
Right.
It's meant to be enjoyed, and it is great. So you're not to avoid it, you're to enjoy it. But then real life sets in. The challenges and the struggles of having a good marriage are very real. But in a lot of ways, they would say, I would take that part of the marriage over the honeymoon season because it's deep and fulfilling. It's just different than I thought it was going to be when I got married. Retirement is a perfect analogy. When you step into retirement, the retirement sugar rush is very real. And it validates all of the lies that you had bought. And so that's why it's dangerous. As you step into it, you haven't thought about retirement other than financial. You step into it and it's everything you thought it could be. It's no alarm on Monday or Tuesday, no meeting to get to, none of those annoying coworkers you have to put up with. You don't have to travel to and from work or whatever. And you've got the yard mowed perfectly, like in Minnesota, where you got those 6 weeks to mow the lawn.
Right, when it's not snowing, you're right.
Yeah. And there's not a weed in the garden, and all the creeks in the house are fixed, and the honey-do list that you've been wanting to get to, or the wood shop in the garage. I mean, I could go on and on. These are good things. But then the first winter rolls around, the time changes. It starts getting dark at 4:30 in the evening and stays dark until 7 a.m. and the wind picks up and you can't get out. And you have not thought at all about who you're going to be when you're not you anymore. And all of those things are done. The sugar rush is over. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how long it's going to be, but it happens to most everyone. Some it's 6 months, some it's a year, some it might last as long as 2 years. But eventually you wake up and say, this can't be me for the next 25 years.
Yeah. When you find some people go back to work at that point, right? Because I haven't defined anything else, and I did have enjoyment and fulfillment when I was working. Maybe I should just go back to work.
You're so right, Joe. That's spot on. Because you know how I was talking about the first 6 months, you're so thankful you don't have to be at that meeting with that annoying coworker. About 9 months later, you're like, I'd really like to see them again.
Right.
You're like, you basically write off all of the built-in structure of work as sort of annoying or something you have to do. And then you eventually just miss it because you're like, man, all of those interactions, they were just there every day. I just had to show up and I got the water cooler talk, or what have you. Even if I didn't always enjoy them, I now see how valuable they were to how I'm built. I have to have interaction.
As you're talking about this process of developing this purpose or influencing others, one of the other things you talk about is actually having a calendar in retirement and creating structure.
That's good. I'm glad you brought that up because it does fit kind of where we're at this point in the conversation, which is there's kind of one thing I want to say is that being busy does not equal being purposeful.
Right.
Joe, I don't know if you've experienced this, but my hardest clients to get in for a review are my retired ones.
There's a retiree I just talked to a couple days ago, and I said to him, and we chuckle all the time, I said, whenever I send you a message, I give it a full month now before I'm concerned if you haven't responded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll hear constantly, I'm busier now in retirement than I was when I was working. I'll say, interesting. Not necessarily a bad thing, but could be. And the reason I say it could be is I find that when people are very uncomfortable with the situation, they tend to make themselves busy. It's the easiest way to cope with it. It's like if you're dealing with some issues in your life, you almost want to distract yourself from them because you don't want to just have to sit in silence and be faced with it. Mm-hmm. And so busyness is as bad as having nothing to do because it can steal your purpose. You can get wrapped up in all of these things, and next thing you know, it's been 10 years. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what have I really accomplished? I've been super busy, but have I done anything of meaning? And so what I tell people, the calendar is not there to make sure you're busy. It's actually there to protect your purpose. It's your purpose shield. And the way you need to use your calendar is you need to get the things on your calendar that you feel like are part of your calling. Who are you going to be? What are you going to do? How are you going to serve others? I'll give you a couple examples. I've got one client. This doesn't have to be like big, audacious volunteerism.
Right.
This can just be, he goes and sees each of his 3 children who live nearby. They all have kids of their own now, like most retirees, right? And they're in the thick of it, raising kids. Well, he'll go by their house, every Tuesday, let's say, and he'll fix anything they haven't had time to get to because he's really good at that. And I don't know about you, Joe, and where you're at with your kids in that stage of life, but I know with mine, it's like when something breaks, it's like, oh, when are we ever going to get to that? It's like,
right.
And he's just showing up saying, one of my purposes is to serve my kids and their families well. So that's going to be on my calendar. And that's not going to be filled with doctor's appointments or pickleball games or golf rounds. It's going to be filled with what I see as part of my purpose. And then another thing he does is he loves illustrating children's books. So he has that blocked off. Now, you still have all the other minutia that you've got to fit in. But the beauty of keeping a calendar that revolves around your purposeful actions is you make sure they happen. They don't get pushed aside because of all the other business. If you allow that, the other things will just eat up your time easily.
Well, I find it interesting because I'm getting into that stage of life where I've got one in college. I'm 3 or 4 years away from before the last one is in college. And I would say my purpose when they were younger was coaching my kids because it felt like I just had more time with them. But I think what probably would be a most common answer as a regret for people is that they didn't spend enough time with their friends. I wish I made time for my friends. And so when you think about this as a retirement calendar, I probably had my own busyness excuse before, but I'm already in my head thinking, man, how can I be a better friend? I don't need to be driving towards the career and all the other stuff anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's very wise of you to think that way. We have coined it the deathbed decision matrix. It's not in the book per se, but a lot of the thoughts are. It is on the podcast that we have, the Afterwork podcast that we do. But we get into some other thoughts there. But this is a good one that you just brought up is let's all envision like our last moments, right? I'm hopeful that I'm blessed enough to be able to spend it with my family and have some time to reflect. And this is the lens that I want to see all my actions through now. And what I mean by that is think of all the things you do in a day or all the things that you could do in a day and ask yourself, when I'm laying there with my family and I'm reflecting, what are the things that I'll have wished I did more of? What I know not's going to be at the top of the list is you're not going to say, I wish I could play one more round of golf. Mm-hmm. I wish I could play some more pickleball. It doesn't make those things bad, and I want to emphasize that. Those things are fun and should be ancillary to your main purpose because you need to enjoy life. We're here to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And I love golfing myself, and I love playing pickleball with my son. Mm-hmm. But this Harvard study that I've mentioned before that it's been out, this study's been going for 85 years, longest running study. It's all on how to live a happy life, essentially. And I'll just cut to the chase because of time. But the one thing they've learned that is the number one contributing factor to happiness for individuals, it's not wealth, it's not achievement, it's not status, it's not accomplishment, it's none of the things we would think it is. It's the quality of their connections, not the quantity. So for all you introverts out there, don't get stressed out. You
don't need 1,000 Facebook friends or whatever.
No. In fact, that can actually work against this theory, which is if you are sick or scared in the middle of the night, who could you call confidently knowing they would come and help you? And it can't be your family, because I would be like, well, I just tapped my wife, but so the point there, Joe, is as we're thinking back through kind of that life end reflection, the largest regret that they also had coming out of the study is that they didn't spend more time with the people they loved and cared about.
Right.
They wish they would have worked less. They wish they would have done less of the activities that weren't meaningful. It all came down to, gosh, if I could go back, I would make it more about people. So that's a really good indication for us for what should be on the calendar.
We're going to take a break here. When we come back, I want to explore some of the differences between Western thought and Eastern thought around the subject of time and our use of it. Hey there, this is Joe. You know me as the host of this podcast, but did you know that I'm also the co-founder and president of Moxie Wealth Management, a boutique wealth management firm in Minneapolis, Minnesota? My team and I excel at taking complex family and business planning concepts and making our financial advice easy to understand. We recognize the trust that executives and families place in our team and value our role in helping our clients be intentional with their assets. When you partner with Moxie, my team and I focus on creating a plan that encompasses your financial goals and philanthropy, while also understanding how you want your wealth to impact your family and future generations. You can trust our unique expertise to build a thoughtful yet strategic wealth and legacy plan for your future. To learn more about me and my firm, send me an email at joe@moxiewealth.com. That's joe@moxiewealth.com. Securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cetera Investment Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Moxie Wealth Management offices are at 2701 University Avenue Southeast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 55414. Do you guys ever get into a little bit more of like maybe Western thought versus Far Eastern thought? I read something a while back, I think it was the Hindu religion, where they believe they'll be reincarnated. So they live this life really slow because they think, I've got many more lives.
Yeah.
I don't need to jam everything into this life. I can relax a little bit. Where in a Western society, we're just, to do and to have seems to be our primary focus.
That's a really insightful question. We do actually hit on that specific topic. We have a chapter on faith in the book. You know, in full disclosure, you know, I'm of the Christian faith and that background. So, you know, we try to write it thoughtfully in such a way that it won't alienate someone who's not a believer. That's not our goal. So we want to be thoughtful about it, but there's just no denying how you see your eternity affects how you live today. A quick example, if you're living in the kind of the Eastern mindset, you're not in a rush to do anything because you have all these different lives to get everything accomplished. So how you view that eternal existence affects all your daily actions. If you're of kind of the Hebraic, like, you know, Christian mindset, you have one life to live, and that life has a huge impact on your eternity. And so this isn't all there is, but it's absolutely meaningful. You know, but if you strip that faith component out and you're just living kind of a, you know, the Western, you know, lifestyle, you know, it's like, hey, this is all there is. Let's, you know, YOLO, you only live once.
Right.
Bigger house, bigger car, bigger whatever you want to call it. You know, those things absolutely shape and form us on the decisions we make today. So it can't be ignored. We all hold different beliefs. In those beliefs and how we see our future, the hope we have in our future has all of the impact on how we live today and who we are.
And then you do advocate a little bit of staying on task. The journaling that you encourage, I think, helps with that. You know, whether it's talking to you or reading different books, it seems like in my lifetime, I've had all these great ideas, and then the ideas went away. Is that part of the reason why you encourage that journaling?
Yeah, it is. And there are a number of disciplines in the book. The idea behind that is I truly believe that if you follow the disciplines, you put yourself in the posture, you build the lattice. Let's think of this example. The lattice is required for the vine to grow on. Without the lattice, the vine doesn't grow. You know, it doesn't reach its highest potential. Mm-hmm. It's not nearly as healthy. Can it grow on the ground? Yeah, I guess it could stay alive, but it's not going to move into its fullest vine.
Right.
So the lattice is all the different things we do to kind of build the structure out. And so, you might think, well, this looks like a number of disciplines. Yes, it is. And it's because we believe that those are the things that actually put the structure in place for you to enjoy an impactful retirement. Mm-hmm. If you don't have any of them, you're going to be waylaid by the world and its message, which is predominantly fear. This is a very simple example, but I try to avoid what I take in as much as possible when it comes to like the news cycle, because it wants you to believe a certain narrative about humankind and everything that's scary and bad about this place. And I turn on the local news for 10 minutes and I'm like, okay, I think I'm depressed now, Yeah,
I mean, I drive my kids. I used to drive my kids to school. And then they were able to drive themselves. And when they were, I got up and I started watching the Today Show. And I'm not even picking on the Today Show. But I hadn't watched news in the morning forever. And the first 15 minutes, to be newsworthy, it needs to be negative, right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
And so you get 15 minutes of, here's all the worst things that happened since yesterday. Go off to work now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, take that in every morning. Imagine you're retired. Your first thing you do is you throw on Fox News or CNN or CNBC. You don't journal, you don't exercise, you don't have some time for spiritual growth, you don't get outside and walk around in awe, taking in how crazy our world is that we take for granted. Like the fact that there's a living, breathing tree next to you that's producing oxygen. I mean, these things we've lost all of our sense of awe. And whatever we put in is what's eventually going to define us. So parts of the book is just making sure that people are starting and putting the right things in, because we believe that if they're in the right posture, they've got the right lattice built, that there's going to be a lot of growth that they never expected. But if you take in that other junk, I'm not saying bury your head in the sand. I think that being in tune with what's going on is important. But being very cautious about how you filter that stuff into yourself, because it really does take you over.
Oh, you've probably seen that thing on Netflix, Social Dilemma, I think is what it was called. Where the idea is the writers of the algorithm just want to keep you on a little longer. And there's no actual moral thought to how I'm keeping you on longer. I just need to keep you on longer. And so what that means is if you lean a little bit right, we want to do a little more right until you're extreme. Or vice versa. If you lean a little left, we're going to keep going. Whatever it is that you're doing, how do we keep feeding back the same information, maybe a little bit more extreme, for you to stay on and engaged? You are the product for the social media. I know some people who are retired who every time I talk to him now has another conspiracy theory. Because he's gone here and here and here, and now we've proven the Earth is flat or whatever is going on, And the other thing from just a social media standpoint is this whole thing of reflection that you're talking about and having purpose. You need time for your brain to shut down. I don't know that people do that.
No. I used to get up early and try to get some extra work done because I'm working. I've got 6 kids. I'm also going to school. And so it was like a time to really knock some stuff out. But I just came to realize, like, I have to have some time where I can just sit there without a screen. For me, it looks like I'll do some mindfulness. That's the first thing I do when I wake up now. I'll then pray. I'll then get into the Word a little bit. And I'll then journal. And that's my first hour. And that's before the kids get up or anyone's bugging me. And I've gotten to the point where I can't do anything else than that, because I know how important it is to fill yourself up with what's true, instead of everything else out there that wants to demand your attention, incent fear, mostly, anxiety, depression. Our mental health, I think, is under attack through social media. That Harvard study is interesting because now that it's evolved so long, they're now studying the social media impact through this whole idea of connection, because social media affronts itself like it's connecting us more, but it's actually disconnecting us more because we never see people or talk to them.
Right.
And he said that social media can actually be helpful if people are interacting with other people for the purposes of like setting a coffee date or building a men's group. It connects them in ways they would have never been able to get connected otherwise. But if you're just scrolling and not connecting, the health benefits are really quite damaging, because then you're just getting into the comparison. You're comparing your worst life because that's how you see yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You. So I know for me, I'm my own worst critic.
Yeah.
So I know me, and I compare myself against everyone's best case scenario. And you do that 100 times, 1,000 times a day. And how are you going to grow from that? You're not. You're just destroying your lattice.
Well, and we had that Time magazine thing from the 1950s. They figured that was the happiest time there ever was. And part of it, I think, was because you didn't know what everybody else had or what everybody else was doing.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, what was that story?
I was at a presentation by the author of The Psychology of Money. I think it's Michael Hauser. I don't want to, sorry, change that. But he was speaking, and I found him to be very engaging. And he talked about the studies that they had done, which showed that the happiest time in our existence was around that 1950s. Of course, we'd just been through some major challenges, right? We had been through the Great Depression, a World War, and finally you could be with your family and just sit around the dinner table together.
Right.
And at that time, we made about 1/10 of what we make today on average. So we're tenfold in terms of income.
Inflation adjusted, right?
Yeah, inflation adjusted.
Right.
Yeah, and we are more miserable without a doubt. And the reason he says it is the case is that our expectations outpace the growth of our income. So I talked about retirement expectations earlier, about how to kind of re-envision how the season's going to be, that it's going to be hard and a challenge, but you are prepared and ready to embrace those challenges, overcome them, and let them make you into something greater. That's very different than I can't wait to spend 12 months a year at the beach house.
Right.
Right. So expectation shift. Well, in the 1950s until now, because we're so interconnected, our expectations have grown at a rate that are just out of control. What we expect out of life and the way we think it should go are far above the income increase. And so we're not happy with any of the income increase because of the expectation explosion.
Well, a little tangent. What do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? I have my kids, and they're looking at it and saying, an influencer on YouTube is making $2 million a year. That's what I want to do, is influence people, right? Or even in sports now, when you think how crazy, some parents could have been to get their kids a college scholarship. Well, now I just saw Shedeur Sanders out your way in Colorado. Mm-hmm. Yeah. His name and likeness contract is $3.8 million. A 19-year-old kid playing football gets paid almost $4 million a year. It's like reality isn't reality anymore.
Yeah, well, you want to mess people up, like give them $4 million when they're 19.
Yeah, what will his expectations be for the rest of his life? I used to work with NFL players, financial advisor for NFL players. You'd think that would be a cool thing, but what it is was 20 to 22-year-old kids getting a big paycheck. Most of the time, they never came for money. And the statistics of that are within 3 years of being out of the league, you're bankrupt. I remember a guy that happened to play for the Colts when Peyton Manning was there. And he said, well, I'm wondering if I should get a private jet. And I was like, help me understand here what you're trying. Well, Peyton does. I said, well, Peyton is Peyton, right? And he makes $30 million a year or whatever it was at the time, and probably gets mobbed when he goes to the airport. You might be a little different profile, where I don't know that certainly income-wise and all that kind of stuff, but even them being around other teammates where they're seeing what their life is like, of course, they're going to make $1 million or $2 million or $5 million a year for 3 years on average, and then the rest of their life not be able to do that.
Joe, that really gets to the heart of the retirement lie, I think. This lie can have its way with you at any point in life. And I have to be really careful about making sure I don't buy the lie, even in my 40s. And same for 19-year-old, quarterback. The lie is that things are going to provide fulfillment. And the fact of the matter is we know for a fact that they don't. But it's what everyone does. It's the culture. And so we have to sort of keep up with the Joneses. And so we do. And there always comes a time in life, I think, where someone who's introspective enough to be honest with themselves will look back and be like, oh my gosh, I spent most of my time pursuing these things, this success, this achievement, this stuff. I neglected my family or whatever. And I'm guilty of this. I'm not judging anyone. I've done this. I've made these mistakes, and I'm still trying to get better at it. But one thing I know to be true is that I've never heard anyone say, I really regret holding back on doing something for myself so that I could go invest it in someone else. Or maybe I didn't buy that brand new car I didn't need, and I helped that kid I've been mentoring who couldn't get out of his parents' house because the cost of living was so much that he couldn't build his family in their own environment. So instead of buying that car I could have had, I gave him the money, down payment to go buy a house. Those kind of things they sound so countercultural because it sounds crazy. But I will tell you that if you make those types of decisions, that's just a random example, you do that over and over again, you're going to be blown away with the amount of impact and fulfillment that you actually receive. Right. You didn't get the car, you gave the money away. You didn't even expect repayment in this scenario, and you're the one that's getting the benefit. It's a paradox of how I believe we're hardwired by God to serve other people and not serve our own self-interests.
The question I was going to ask you, because we ask everybody when they come on the podcast here, this whole thing is about people's success and their path to success and how they feel about it. And you may have described it in large part there, but how would you define success?
Well, when I first got into the business, I had it all wrong. I wanted to be independently wealthy as young as possible. I wanted to not work. I didn't come from money, so much like maybe the athlete you described, although I wasn't an athlete, I all of a sudden did have some money. And I don't know, but I went through a season that was just kind of dark, and I got what the lie sells, which is I thought I wanted these things, and those things eventually will pull the rug out from under you and show you how empty they are and where they lead to. But I think, by God's grace, he gave me the ability to turn it around, and he changed the way I saw everything, which is funny because now I'm writing books about why people shouldn't retire.
Right.
Even though that was my goal, back when I was 20. And so to me, I think success is using your time really well to make it about others. And I think one day when I look back, that's going to be the thing that I'm going to say, did I do that well? Did I always want to be happy? Did I want my own happiness to carry the day? Or did I want to wake up and say, all right, I'm on mission today. Who am I going to be able to help? Whose life can I improve? Might be a simple conversation. Might be buying someone behind me at Starbucks a coffee. Might be tipping the dude that's bringing in the grocery carts at King Soopers who no one ever even looks at. It might be the person across the street from you that's struggling that you've never talked to. There's so much pain out there. And I think we're here to help carry one another's burdens. And so what I'm trying to wake up to each day, and I try to do this in my financial planning practice too, is how can I really help? Not just pie charts and portfolio allocations, but what can I do for you? And I try to go around looking for those things all day long now, and I love it. And I'll just leave you this as a quick little twist of how you can be on mission all the time. Even if you love golfing, even if you love pickleball, fantastic. Maybe instead of going golfing and just trying to shoot a low score and enjoy the day for yourself, maybe you put in the back of your mind to say, you know what, I know Bob and his wife are struggling. I know there's some issues there, or I've heard they're having an issue with their kid or something. You have some sense of what's going on in the people's lives that you're doing those kinds of things with. Can you press into that? can you not only have fun playing golf, but can you see how they're doing? Can you see how you might be able to serve them? Can you unpack one way that you can make a difference in their life? And I think if you incorporate that into everything you do, you'll be on a fun and fulfilling adventure.
Great. Well, Joel, thanks for joining us. Your book, Afterwork, and the podcast also is Afterwork. You can find that anywhere.
The Afterwork podcast. We've got some good episodes up. We're having fun with it. Not quite as professional as yours, but we're trying to get there. And the book is available everywhere. One thing that's kind of unique about the book that I'll just mention because it is different, we have a conversation guide via QR code in the back. And we've learned it does really well in groups. It can be a fun topic to get together with, 3-4 couples that you enjoy and just kind of unpack the topic because everyone's got a story around retirement, whether they're retired or not. And so that's been kind of fun. So yeah, it's available everywhere.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it, man.
Yep. Awesome. You've been listening to Joel Malick, partner at Everoak Wealth Company in Colorado Springs and author of the book Afterwork, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a life worthy of dreams. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only and are not necessarily those of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice.